Welcome to Hebrew Bible Insights, a podcast about making sense of the Hebrew Bible. I'm Matthew Delaney. I'm here with Dr. Nathan French. And today we're doing a very unique episode. I'm very excited about this. This has been an interview long in the making. We're talking about a book called Interpreting Israel's Scriptures. If you're listening to this podcast, then you share a value with me and Nathan, which is we want to approach the Hebrew Bible in a holistic, responsible way. But how do we do that? All of us come from different backgrounds with different forms of training and education. We've all spent different lengths of time studying these texts, and there's so much to it. The deeper we get into the study of Scripture, I think we all have those moments where we think we've reached a mountain peak, but then we realize that the expanse extends way beyond where we thought that it had once reached. And there's so many different tools that we want in our toolkit on the
Yeah.
journey of exegesis.
Mm.
So, for example, for me, my gateway into deep study of the Hebrew Bible was the Hebrew language. And for a couple of years, I lived in the Hebrew language space. It was so much fun for me to translate the text, to read the text in the Hebrew language. It was so engaging and great. But at some point, I had to realize that all of these Hebrew words strung together are ultimately forming larger movements of either narrative or poetry. And I need to understand the structure of these books, how they were formed, what are they doing? And obviously, the Hebrew language informs that, but there's more to grow. After a couple of years, I had to realize, yes, I can understand the big picture story of books like Genesis or what the different writings of Isaiah are doing. But what do these mean in their original historical context? At every stage in my journey, I've had different people who have helped me along the way. People like Lenore Mulligan and Don Vance with Hebrew. People like Tim Mackey and Tom Wright to understand the narrative of Scripture. People like Dr. Nathan French to help me with the ancient history component. We all have our own gateway, but once we get through that, we want to mature and become more holistic by incorporating multiple methods in how we approach the text. And the book that we're talking about today, I think is going to be a really helpful resource for people like us. Whether we feel like we are experts, but we want to sharpen some of those tools we haven't used as much as others, or if we're starting at the very beginning and we're still looking for what our gateway entry is into deep study, or we only have one good tool, we want to get a few extra to go along the way. I think this is going to be a great book. It's called Interpreting Israel's Scriptures, a practical guide to the exegesis of the Hebrew Bible / Old Testament by Matthieu Richelle. Here's the book and what it looks like. It's a beautifully well done book.
Very much so.
Hendrickson always does a really good job with the quality of their materials. And he's a French scholar. So, due to the dynamics there, all of us thought it'd be best to do a written interview. That's what he preferred. And so we've written him some questions. He's written our responses. And we're going to read those to you. And then Nathan and I will discuss beyond that. So we're excited to dive in and talk about this. Do you have any other general thoughts about the kind of the aim and goal of being a holistic and responsible exegete of the Hebrew Bible before we discuss the book?
No, I thought that was an excellent intro. So well done in sort of sharing your own story, but I think it really covers very well why we need exegesis. But the bottom line is this: that once you begin deep study into the Hebrew Bible or the biblical text, you find quickly that there are so many different layers of meaning that come with the text that it requires a method. It requires a deep methodology. And the good news is that scholars have gone before and they've provided their tools, talked about which tools are the best tools in order to understand the text in its own right and in its own context. So what this book does is it truly is a practical guide to doing that. And as you know, Monty, we've discussed this a lot, so I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but it's an excellent text that really provides a deep understanding into the exegetical method so that we can understand the text properly in its own right.
Excellent. You use the word practical, and that's also in the subtitle of the book. And I think of anything that stands out the most, that would be top of my list.
Absolutely.
It is so practical. It truly is a handbook.
Yeah.
This feels like something that you can You can, as you're trying to become a better exegete, you can reference this and it will help you in a very practical way. So I really enjoyed that element of the book. In fact, before we go to his official questions, I wanted to show everyone on YouTube, sorry to our podcast listeners, you can hear me describe the outline, but those of you on YouTube, you'll be able to see the outline of the book. How is it structured? What's his approach? So let me go ahead and pull that up.
That's great.
So the book is broken up into 3 major sections. Part 1, he calls the making of the text. Part 2, he calls the various facets of the text. And part 3, he calls the reader in front of the text. So let's do a brief overview of what he's doing in each of these sections so you can get a feel of what he covers. In part 1, the making of the text, he addresses a few major categories. First being translation, then textual criticism, and then compositional criticism. In a way, this is part 1. It's compositional criticism analysis, and then compositional criticism synthesis. And that's what makes up this first part. And one thing that you'll already note, I'm not going to do this for every section, but you'll see that for every chapter, he gives an overview, which is a really succinct way to describe what this whole section is about. And then he breaks down what are the major tasks in a big picture way still, though. What are the major tasks that you have to do, the responsibilities you have in order to accomplish that section well? Translation is probably not the best section for me to use as an example for reasons he explains in the book, but you can take any one of these sections. And so then he breaks it up. Chapter 3, for example, breaks down into 3.1, 3.2. Other sections have more, like 3.3, 3.4, theoretically. And it's the different steps that you do. And then one of the best parts of the book is he gives so many examples. And so every single item that you do, he gives examples from the Bible, and he explains why that method impacts how we interpret that specific text. And he's hand-chosen sections that actually feel meaningful and engaging. So it's not just the same. It's not like he said, okay, we're going to go through the book of Ruth and see how we apply all of these methods to Ruth. Right. He just chooses any section of verses or chapters for the whole book. And so if you look at chapter 2, for example, he has 2.1, collect the evidence. 2.2, this, by the way, chapter 2 is about textual criticism. So 2.1 is collect the evidence. 2.2, compare the textual witnesses. 2.3, explain scribal mistakes. 2.4, explain intentional changes. 2.5, explain large-scale differences. And 2.6, explore the impact of the variance. So the steps are very succinctly put. And once you open up the book yourself, you can see he explains how do you go about doing that. And then he gives a bunch of examples. So 2.2, you see an example from 1 Kings 14:24. On scribal mistakes, he gives 2 different examples. On explain intentional changes, he gives 4 examples, and so on. So this just gives you a feel for how he's structured the book and how he approaches all the different areas. The last thing I'm going to say before we dive into the questions is I just want everyone to hear and or see what he covers. So he talks about translation, textual criticism, compositional criticism, analysis, compositional criticism, synthesis. That's all the first section. Part 2 is the various facets of the text. This is where he goes into literary genre, literary context, historical geography, history, literary structure, poetry, narrative criticism, and intertextuality. Lastly, part 3 of the book, the reader in front of the text, he has a section on reception, feminist and gender studies, and post-colonial criticism. So he covers all of the major, most popular methods that are being used by scholars today as a way to discuss interpreting the Hebrew Bible. Do you have any other thoughts on the structure of the book that you kind of thought about as you were reading this for our review and our interview?
Well, I think the structure is fantastic, and throughout the book he's giving all sorts of bibliographic information of different books that you can go to help you understand that particular aspect of the methodology better. And the examples, though, as you noted, are the best part. I mean, as you have examples right there in the text that he provides for every subsection within the larger structure of the book is just really great. And I think he's laid it out quite methodically, and in light of other books like this, the structure is similar. It's just that this one is so thorough and so updated. It's really a treasure to have.
Yeah, it's really excellent. So let's go ahead and let's dive into our questions.
Yeah,
I've been doing a lot of the talking so far. Do you want to? We'll have you read the first question we
sure.
had emailed him and reader's response.
Yep. So I will read the question. So question number one that we asked is, in case people aren't familiar with you or your work, can you tell us about yourself, how you got into Hebrew Bible studies, and what you are passionate about in this field? And this was Richelle's response. I have always wanted to study the Bible, and as a believer and as someone who is interested in ancient history. In my family tree, you find some pastors, missionaries, and priests, and this background certainly influenced me. But my first profession was math teacher, and it's only when I began teaching that I started taking courses in theology and in Semitic languages. It soon became a passion, and the virus has never left me. I became a professor of Old Testament 13 years ago. My areas of expertise are textual criticism, the comparison of manuscripts, and epigraphy, the study of ancient inscriptions. I tend to work too much, but thankfully, my wife, my two kids, and my Xbox help me keep in touch with normal life in that order.
Yeah, it's in that order, just so you know.
That's great.
That Xbox is below his two kids.
That's right.
I like how he writes this. You already get a taste about one of the things in his book that I enjoy is he talks more personally. His writing style, it feels more like he's talking to you in a conversational way, which
Yeah.
personally, I really prefer that style. I like
Yeah.
that a lot. And you
Yeah.
get a feel for that even in the way he responds
No,
to
you
this
really
question.
do. Yeah. And I like too that it's always fun to ask professors and scholars, how did you ever end up in this particular area of study? And inevitably, it's not always the case, but it's nice to see that there is a sense in which a family background has a lot to play in it. Not always, but in many cases it can be the case, and so it's fun to read about that here too. So
Something else I like to point out is that he is a former math teacher.
yes,
And I have found that some of my favorite people to interact with, whether it's Bible studies that I've been in, or people that I teach biblical Hebrew to, or professors I've studied under, are in that kind of realm of intellect. So, one of the people I teach biblical Hebrew to, he works in the IT world.
yeah,
One of my Greek and New Testament professors, he was a former engineer. And there's just a different kind
there
of
is.
intelligence that they bring
Hmm.
to the table. And one of the things they tend to be a little better at, in my opinion, is clarity.
Yeah.
Because I think there might be a little more black and white, a little more numbers
Hmm.
minded, and they tend to just really track things down and find a really clear way to put it. Because they may not have that. I think sometimes people who are super into the humanities, we can become a little bit abstract, a little bit more theory,
Too
a little
philosophical, are we? Yes.
little too philosophical. So we need both sides,
We need
but
both.
I
Yeah.
I
Well, it
think
is true. I had a math major in one of my, what was it, research seminar courses in undergrad, and but just a brilliant student. He was taking a theology course, going to do some, I think, a minor in theology, and his questions on biblical studies were so laced just logically. I loved it because it required just a nice conversation about the logic of the text, and I think that that's really what we get from the mathematical perspective. And two, when it comes to laying out a book like what we have here, you can sort of notice the structure. There's a real crisp and clear and just full on logic to the structure. You get this, of course, in like you were saying, and with other trained professors and scholars, but the mathematical side is certainly coming out. You can see it. So
What I would encourage all our listeners with is you all have a different background that you bring when it comes to the
yeah.
study of the Hebrew Bible. And I'm sure that the people that you're studying with also enjoy that, no matter what it
Hmm.
is, even if it's something as simple as you're a pretty funny person and you can bring humor to the teaching element.
I
Uh,
took a class at Hebrew University called Humor in the Bible with Ed Greenstein. It was
really?
fantastic. Yes, it was all about finding humor in the Bible, and we had to write a paper on humor in a particular story. It was great. So
How fun.
yeah.
Right, here's the next question we asked him. What inspired you to write a book about exegesis of the Hebrew Bible? And he said, 10 years ago, as a young professor teaching exegesis, I felt that my students desperately needed a methodology for doing the exegesis of biblical texts. I set to work on it one summer, but I was not planning to write a book, only an outline with bullet points and instructions. Then I could not help giving some examples, and soon I found out that I needed to explain things more clearly. I could not stop. At the end of the summer, I had written a book. The English version that just appeared is a considerably revised and expanded version of the French original.
Nice.
It's important to note that this book is new to the English-speaking world, but not new to the world. This book has been, I think, about 10 years, if I remember right.
Yeah.
But this has been very influential in French-speaking circles. So it's tested and in that way, but also highly updated, as he mentioned. Everything's up to date, and now the English-speaking world has access to his ideas.
And it's been translated for us by his wife, right?
I
Helped
believe
by
he
his
said
wife. Yeah.
his wife helped in the translation.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
I think she had a role in helping him with
Okay.
that. So that's kind
Yeah.
of fun. Imagine
Yeah.
that tag team.
Yeah. Absolutely. But it is nice to have this in the English speaking world, and I'm going to use it in my next course, actually. So I'm doing a course on Hebrew exegesis and hermeneutics, and I am so excited to use it and to see how the students are gonna be able to step into exegesis after having done a year of Hebrew already. I like too that he says here that I felt that my students desperately needed a methodology. It is true that when you begin teaching scripture, you realize, especially at a deep level, when you're using the Hebrew text, there, as we mentioned, you find that there are multiple layers that bring meaning to the interpretation, and I can relate to this. That there comes a moment you're like, these students need something more defined, more of an outline in order to lead them through the text. I'm sure you felt this way as you jumped into your own studies. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
I think it really depends on what our journey was into scripture in terms of like the methodology side. Because sometimes we might read books where scholars are applying their methodology.
Hmm.
Same with articles. We read books or articles where they're applying their methodology, but they're not necessarily explaining their
Mm.
methodology. In other words, it's the behind the scenes of how they do what they do. And I've learned that there is a difference between doing something well and explaining what you do in a manner where we can try to emulate it.
Yeah.
To use
Yeah.
a sports analogy, it's shocking, I would say, how many of the best athletes are not great coaches.
Yeah.
And I say
That's true.
shocking, it's really more surprising, right? Because we would
Yeah.
think, man, if you're so good at basketball,
Surely you'd be a
surely you'd be a
great
great
coach.
coach.
Yeah.
But sometimes the skill sets don't overlap in a way that we might think is intuitive.
Hmm.
And so, um, uh, for example, Steve Kerr was a teammate of Michael Jordan. No one would ever even say that Michael Jordan was, or sorry, that Steve Kerr was a better player than Michael Jordan. Far from it. Yet Steve Kerr is arguably, he's one of the greatest coaches of all time.
Mm.
So not saying he was a bad player. He made it to the NBA. That's really impressive. But he's a great coach. So to me, I think we always want, it doesn't, by the way, it also doesn't mean we don't want to watch Michael Jordan and learn how to play. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean he doesn't have good thoughts to say. Some people are just simply better at teaching and others are better at doing.
Yeah.
And the way we learn from them is a little bit differently. So someone, I think a scholar who's amazing at the exegesis, I'm going to read their articles, read their books, and just see how do they present their research? What insights do they see? But at some point, I also want to learn from people who are good at giving the behind the scenes of the process. And I think Matthieu Richelle, he's one of those people that he's very good at
Yeah.
explaining what the process actually looks like. And I think everyone needs to have at least one person in their life who's like that.
Yeah. And you know what else it does is it helps us to understand why interpretations exist and how we got to that level of interpretation. And I think that this becomes very helpful for my students who are going much deeper into the text, doing actual exegesis on the original languages, for example, or even just doing good hermeneutics on the English text that they may have, having not been trained in the original languages. It's important to know that when we're coming at different levels of interpretation on the same text, we have to be able to explain how we got there and why we got there, and the methodology becomes very important in that respect. So, I think it's something that we don't teach just lay people, for example. We sort of just offer interpretations and suggest that that is the interpretation. Maybe this is what preachers do, I
Mm.
think. And they don't provide their exegetical methodology or how they ever came to that result in the text. But lo and behold, the moment you sit down and start talking about it with a group and everybody gets to share a thought or an idea, it's at that point that exegesis methodology, exegetical methodology, becomes very important in order to understand why the interpretation is what it is. So,
That's really good. And I think it
yeah.
also makes it easier to be holistic more consistently.
Yeah,
Because if
good.
we don't understand methodology, then we don't understand how all the different tactics that we do fit into a broader philosophy.
Right.
And once we learn a methodology, we can realize, okay, here are patterns of analysis that
Mm-hmm.
fit within a coherent framework that we can
Mm-hmm.
apply
Yeah.
into that sort of system.
No,
That's really
that's
good.
excellent. No, very good. All right, let's do number three, huh?
Yes, let's do
So,
that.
number three, the question was this. So, what sets your exegetical book apart from others? And the response was this: it's practical nature and its scope. That's what sets it apart. It's practical nature and its scope. My impression is that most authors of handbooks of exegesis spend a lot of time discussing the history of the field and addressing theoretical considerations, after which they give only a very few concrete examples. Very true. I tried to do exactly the opposite. Be practical, put myself in the shoes of a student, and explain with the greatest possible clarity and pragmatism how to proceed. But several colleagues in the US found that what set my book apart from others is that it takes into account both traditional approaches to exegesis and more recent methods, such as feminist and postcolonial exegesis. Let me add that although I have my own faith, I made a point of writing a handbook that is neutral with regard to religious affiliation. It can be used by Jews, Christians, non-religious people, etc.
Yeah, we've already talked a lot about the practical nature and the scope. We went through the outline there. Definitely some strengths.
Yeah.
Um,
What I really like about this, especially as he ends here, mentioning that this book can be used by all sorts of different faith traditions, is that it really puts exegesis where it belongs, and that is in the realm of the community, and that is often forgotten by many of us. Though I think on a practical level, it's lived out by many of us that we're all part of communities that have very serious and, how do I want to put it, very serious and maybe even ignorantly agreed upon or unknowingly agreed upon methodologies with regard to interpretation. And this, in what he has laid out, allows for students to find the practicality that is needed in order to move into a deep study of Scripture. And it's not necessarily just based on, or is not necessarily just written for, as he says, one religious affiliation, which means we can all employ these in our different communities for interpretive measures.
yeah, yeah, that's really helpful. That's really
Mm-hmm.
helpful. I mean, just step aside from scripture. Why do we think or believe what we think or believe about anything?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not an advocate of doing it in deconstructing your whole life, because that's an endless pursuit. but there are certain things that are really pivotal and important in our life that we want to understand. Like, okay, why is it that I or we think a certain way? And, we might, the way we approach life might be an epic ship on the seas of the ocean, and it's mostly pretty airtight. Um, but we might be shocked at how did those barnacles get there? When did
Yeah.
those get attached?
Mhm.
And I think, look, if Scripture, for those of faith, if Scripture is really the one of the like it's a core foundational source of doctrine, then let's make sure that we do the due justice of let's go back to Scripture.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, of course, maybe I'll just use my own life. I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic and I'm in the charismatic Pentecostal tradition. So, I can have one side of me in my family line or just in myself saying, you're not reading it in a Catholic way. You don't read the text like the Catholic would read that or interpret that particular text. Or I'll get the Pentecostals over here saying you're not employing Pentecostal hermeneutics the way you should be to interpret that particular text. And then, of course, the scholar over here is saying, but that's not what the ancient Near Easterner was saying or thinking here in this particular light. And it just shows then that we need agreed upon methodologies, no matter what community we're coming from, that we can all sort of engage with, so that we can, in fact, come to good and proper interpretation of the text for our community so that we can actually have something to stand upon to say, yes, this is the best way to read the text. We did a recent episode, for example, and we're going to do a recording on this, but a recent episode on Genesis 6, 1-4, with the B'nai Elohim and the Banot Ha'adam. So you have the daughters of men and you have the sons of God. And there are different ways to interpret that particular text, but it is very much based on your exegetical methods with regard to the Hebrew and the text that is there. So that is an episode to come. We will do exegesis on that and even show two fully different interpretations of the Hebrew words and what they mean in an episode to come.
Didn't we do that episode and it was
We
released?
we did, and we released it, but I think we should do a full-on sort of Sethite view versus what is actually written.
Yes,
Yeah, so
that's
that
right.
we did some exegesis there, but I think we're going to do a full-on.
I'm
Here are the
excited.
two various interpretations of this, but it requires a certain methodology at the core, and in any case, I know we're sort of pushing this example to the level that we are here at this moment, but his book does a fantastic job of really laying out both traditional exegesis and the newer forms of exegesis so that you can just be aware. This is the way that people are interpreting the text. And the reason why they're interpreting the text is because in this particular way is because of the methodologies that they're using.
Sure.
And here they are. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and that's helpful for understanding people. Like if you know what someone's worldview is, it probably helps explain why certain certain discussions you have go the ways that they go.
Sure.
And so I imagine in a somewhat similar way, you can start seeing if, okay, there's certain people who they tend to reach certain conclusions and it's, they tend to go with a certain type of methodology, and it helps us to understand things better in that way too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, let's go to the next question here. We asked him, your book reads like a true manual. Clear descriptions of each part of the process with instructions for every step and corresponding examples to illustrate. Can you share a bit of what this style looks like in your book and why you decided to take this approach? Here's what he says. When I was studying math, most handbooks were abstruse and only gave very schematic demonstrations of theorems because they assumed the students were so smart that it would be almost degrading for a professor to explain in too much detail. But there was this math professor in Paris who wrote a series of handbooks in which he unabashedly explained everything in full detail, in a relaxed manner, as if he was talking to the reader. The result may seem less classy than lofty expositions, but this is really what students need. I tried to do the same with the exegesis of the Hebrew Bible / Old Testament. People who want to read my more sophisticated essays can read my scholarly articles, but for this handbook, I decidedly sided with the students.
I have to agree with that. I mean, having read through it, he definitely sides with the students, and that's why I think I can't wait to get it in the hands of students to see them use it in real time for practical purposes. So,
Yeah. There's probably a good lesson in there for all of us who are trying to communicate valuable ideas, and for the purpose of this episode, communicating the Hebrew Bible with other people. Sometimes it's just really good for us to remember, how do I add value to others? It's not about how smart do I come across. It's about how do I look at who my audience is, and to the best of my ability, how do I communicate in a way that adds value to them?
hmm.
And he does a good job with that.
Yeah.
All
Yeah, I
right.
think, and I think he's being honest too. There is a time for the complexity and the scholarly work that he takes on, and he says
Mhm.
if you want to read that, you can go find those articles and do it. But for this one, it's definitely for those who are a student hasn't been trained enough potentially to dive into the technical languages of a more scholarly article, and so that's why I think this book is excellent. And it's certainly great too what he mentioned even in the previous question about how some of these handbooks really deal with the history of interpretation and hermeneutics and exegesis. And fascinating though those histories are, as I mean, when I teach hermeneutics here, biblical hermeneutics, I love going through the history of interpretation and the hermeneutical method. It's a lot of fun, but it is verbose, and it does sort of just weigh you down at the very beginning of going through a handbook like that. So the fact that he sort of intersperses it, I think, throughout the book more than just starting there is a real quality to the text. And I think that in line with this question is quite good that we sided with the student on that one. So
That's great. All right, let's go to the next question.
number 5. So you do an excellent job at making the complex task of exegesis fun. Often, complication can steal the joy from once eager exegetes. How do we keep a perspective that keeps us excited as we learn about all the factors of biblical interpretation? And here is his response. Perhaps a good starting point would be to avoid taking ourselves too seriously while taking the text seriously. That's good. After all, we are just writing footnotes to spiritual and literary treasures, and as exegetes, we often can't do better than to put forward provisional hypotheses. But experience proves that studying biblical texts generally is an exciting task, during which we find actual gems, whether spiritually or literally. Whether spiritually or literarily, we are confronted with existential questions. We like or dislike what we read. We can debate it. This never ends. And it can be an intellectually joyful experience. I can't help being impressed by the texts of the Hebrew Bible. They are often highly polished, evidently the result of a lot of work, and an inexhaustible source of study.
That's why we're here, why we're doing what we're doing.
That's why we do a podcast on YouTube. That's why we have listeners listening to the podcast too.
Yep.
I might add. So
Yep.
it is true. It is a joyful experience. I mean, think about it, Matthieu. I mean, how long have you been in this now of just serious study of the Hebrew Bible?
Yeah, it's a good question. Depends what serious counts. I mean, if you imagine, you know, a 5-year-old running around with a cape around his neck and a yellow lightsaber trying to pretend to be Bible man, you know, does that does that count the beginning of my serious Bible study? Um, but in all seriousness, no,
Possibly.
I think fun really does matter. I think
Yeah.
that's, you know, that's because I know for me, like, there was a level to which I always valued scripture and was reading and learning. Um, but it wasn't, you know, I started getting exposed to academic education on the
Mm-hmm.
Hebrew Bible during my undergraduate degree in a cursory way. It
Mm-hmm.
was not my formal education, though. I was a communication major.
Right.
I was a modern Hebrew minor. And I basically listened to podcasts by people like Tim Mackey or N.T. Wright, for example, people who are PhD scholars who are doing a good job of reaching general communities with good information. But it wasn't until after my undergraduate degree where I really started getting exposed to the whole discussion and methodologies. So, yeah, there's a marked difference for me. But I'll say this, there were some times during my master's degree where the joy level was lower. And I think often it was because um, because I felt like I had to figure out the answer right now.
Hmm.
I felt like as I was learning there were certain components I wanted clarity because some of the ways maybe I viewed things were challenged based on just information and learning. Some of that was really fun. Some of that it was instant. Oh, this makes so much more sense. I'm glad I'm learning this. Other things I had to wrestle with more.
Mm.
And I think I had to learn to enjoy the journey
Mm.
and know that this is, and that's okay. And
Yeah.
speaking as a Christian, uh, for me, I think we realize on the other side of the text is God.
Mm.
And for me, I think I had to realize that if I'm ever wrestling with the text, that's okay, because ultimately it's just another way of me pursuing the fullness of who God is.
Yeah.
And
Amen.
even if sometimes that wrestle isn't, oh, I know exactly how to explain everything, that's still okay,
Yeah.
because who of us will fully understand every single detail of Scripture? Who of us can fully experience and express all of who God is? And it's just taking a humility, humble pill is really good. And knowing I'm just one human, have fun with the journey.
Hmm.
I'll learn more. And some things take time, some things are not right away. And that helped me have a lot more fun. And it helps
Mm.
me today, right? Like if people ask me a question I don't know, it's just like, I don't know. That sounds fun. Let's research that.
Yeah.
Let's dig into it, see what we find.
Hmm. Excellent. Yeah, it's very good. There just is a joy to studying scripture, and I think he's really making a good point here on this. Is that historically, I mean, look, we're millennia into this. I mean, people have been doing this for a long time, and the reason why the texts exist the way they do. I have a Hebrew student. We meet twice a week for an hour, and we read Hebrew together uh, over FaceTime, right? And we read a particular passage. We're going through Ezekiel now, but we're also doing some work on Exodus as we were reading through Exodus before that. And we just go very slowly, and we just read every verse in Hebrew, and we discuss and we talk, and it helps her keep her Hebrew going. And it's very interesting here how much fun that really is, how much joy that brings. And as he says, the treasures that come out, both one, the spiritual treasures that you get, of course, because you're reading the Word of God, but two, when you're studying at a very high depth, but two, the the literary treasures that you realize, wow, the writers, the redactors, the people who put this together, this is brilliant material. It's not just archaic nonsense that can't be understood. There's real brilliance here. And of course, I'm sure we all think this and know this, but we sometimes think of the ancients as if they were uninformed, as if they weren't enlightened, if you will. I know we've talked about this a lot, but when you study the Hebrew text at a very high depth like this, you can't help but notice, like, we are dealing with some real brilliance here that just continues to come forth, and it brings
Absolutely.
real joy. Lots of fun to study it. So,
It really does.
yeah.
It really does. That's really good. Great thoughts. Great thoughts.
Number
Okay.
6.
Number 6. What skill of exegesis do you feel is underutilized in academia? What about the church? I was really excited to ask him this question, by the way, because we think about both of these groups often as we prepare content, and I was curious to see his thoughts on this. Here's what he had to say. In the context of academia, what strikes me the most is the fact that scholars are often over specialized and run the risk of neglecting methods and approaches they don't practice themselves. It makes perfect sense to be specialized, of course. It's inevitable in academic research, and I have my own areas of expertise. But what we can do is to keep an open mind and try to learn a bit about other approaches. The texts have many facets and therefore require a multiplicity of methods to be explored. And it pains me to think that due to our limited skills, we impose limits to understanding them. In the context of the church, my sense is that preachers don't make the most of the biblical text. Exegesis and preaching are often kept apart in their minds, whereas I think there should be a continuum. But
Mm-hmm.
to achieve that, exegesis professors could talk a bit more about the contents of the text, not just the historical and formal aspects. And preachers could read more exegesis. When I assign an exegetical essay to my students, I give them the possibility, if they are interested, to conclude with a reflection on the contemporary relevance of the text, which can take many forms.
Yeah. Good.
I wonder if you could comment a bit on overspecialization um, in
Yeah.
academia. What
Yeah.
does that resonate with you? Maybe not. What are your thoughts?
Well, it is certainly a trend. Look, I think he's right. He says to an extent that that is definitely required in academia. You have to specialize, and he has his own expertise. And um, on the positive side of over specialization or specialization in general is just the fact that there's so much here in Hebrew. Just take Hebrew Bible and the ancient Near Eastern side of study, right? There is so much that can be done on a scholarly level that specialization is required because no one person has the time or the maybe or even the talent to be able to do it all, and to be at a level of such general knowledge that they could specialize in everything in that particular way. There is that on the positive side that we do need the specialization, but on another level, the weakness of that is that when a lot of us, I would say, scholars coming out of the PhD land, um, they have specialized. That's what they did. They studied one particular thing for several years and they wrote about it, and that was the specialization that they received. But the tools that they have are to, in fact, develop a life that goes beyond the specialization. And I think that that is the important aspect. And it would be good for academics, I think, to begin to remember that this is a community and that we, though are specialized in our areas, that we must come to a place where it is good to understand the other methodologies and the other aspects and ways in which people are reading the text. If for no other reason, it gives you more scholarship, more things to write about, uh, and for good reason. It allows you to be in camaraderie and good scholarship with other scholars in other specialized areas. One area where this really shows itself within our area is certainly Hebrew Bible, and then Assyriology or just ancient Near Eastern study. So, some of us who were trained in Hebrew Bible and ancient Near Eastern studies, we aren't Assyriologists. I would never call myself an Assyriologist, but have done extensive study within Near Eastern study, and love it and love working with the Assyriologists and their scholarly work, using it in my own study of the Hebrew Bible. But there is nonetheless a definite line between the specializations, between just reading the Hebrew Bible and Assyriology. Or we could go even closer to home and talk about, oh, well, your Hebrew Bible, you're not Second Temple, or your Second Temple, you're not New Testament. And this is the sort of specialization that you get. And I think part of the issue for that, especially for the church, is that you'll get scholars who specialize in Second Temple literature, and they can understand the New Testament from a Second Temple perspective, but they've never touched, for example, the Hebrew Bible or the ancient Near East. And, well, their Second Temple world's reading in a Hebrew Bible and an ancient Near Eastern text, that might be important for interpretation, and it might lead to different levels of interpretation. So yeah, I just think that, but back to what we're talking about with exegesis, it's because of the specialization that we have so many different models of exegetical methodology, that we have to have a book like what Richelle here has created, Professor Richelle here has created, because it helps us to understand the different specializations. So, in one sense, it's not going anywhere. We need and we have over specialization, and it's not going to disappear anytime soon. You have it in the medical field, for example. I mean, it used to be you were just a medical doctor, but now you're either a general practitioner or you specialize in whatever. I mean, pick and choose.
Well,
There's
my wife, as an
your wife,
example,
for example.
she's
Yeah.
she's my wife's a pediatrician, but
Hmm.
she's a nursery specialist. So her
Exactly.
job is seeing infants on the first few days of life, and that's it. So
Mm-hmm.
after the first few days, they go to somebody else. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about specialization, right? Like, can you imagine
Yeah.
for how long of human history have we had societies where it's made sense to have someone whose job is to only see babies on the first few days of life,
Yeah.
and then
It,
someone else takes on from there?
It's so true. And what you have there, though, I think, is that you have the specialization because we have had such a fruitful and how do I want to put it? Sort of a a time in which study in our culture has allowed this sort of specialization because there are times we had to overlook certain things, we were ignorant of it, but because we were able to get more specialized, now you have a doctor like this, a medical doctor that is
Yep.
only focused on the first few days of life, because that matters. There are reasons why we need that to happen. Same with
Yeah.
exegesis and same with the study of scriptures. The more that we know, the deeper this specialization goes. But his point is valid. We need to always remember to come back and see the whole picture and try to be those
Yeah.
scholars that can work within various specializations, at least work within it, if not be
Totally.
specialized. Yeah. What did you
Totally.
think of that? What did you think about what he says here about the church? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I just have to say, such a thorough response from you. I'm so glad to have your expertise on this podcast.
Well, thank
Your
you.
PhD knowledge. It's so thorough, so good. I mean, I think I just agree with everything you said. I can't react to everything you mentioned. What I will say, I think people should use specialization as an opportunity to remember the body of Christ, to remember the overall community, that we can lean on each other and that's okay, and not give in to the path of pride, which is, it's the person who can't say, I don't know, and the person who's refusing to say, can you help me? Because I think whether we're academics, whether we work at churches, whether we just take scripture seriously, anytime we take something with, like, we're passionate about it and it's a part of our identity makeup, because I'm a teacher, I'm a pastor, or I've studied the Bible a long time, it becomes harder and harder to say, I don't know, but you know what? Someone else might know. Or, I might have an answer, but
Yeah.
who'd be even better if you
Exactly.
talk to them
Yeah.
about it. It's not a black and it's not like a binary thing, right? Like, there are times in my classes where I'll say, let me give you my response. But I would, and I give my response, but I say, who'd be perfect if you want to get a really, I think, an even better, deeper answer? Go talk to Dr. Nathan French, because he's really good at talking about these things. I do that frequently in my classes. Or there might be a different professor at our university that today I recommended some people want to talk about the modern Middle East. Today, you should talk to Dr. John Swales. He has amazing thoughts on this. So I think instead of viewing ourselves as deficient because of our specialization, we see the blessing that it is, and let's happily include other people, whether that's in our own formation or that of others.
Yeah.
Bringing it back to the book, what I'll say is, again, no matter where you find yourself, whether you feel like you have no specialty yet, and you're still trying to figure out what you want to specialize in, or there are a couple areas you feel great in, but you want to bone up on some other areas and get a little stronger in. One of the ways we can find clarity is not just through thinking, but by action. And I think this is a book that will help you take action, and through his examples, getting into the text, trying out the different methods, and you'll see, which methods do I enjoy the most? And just start there.
Yeah.
Just start by including.
Yeah.
So to me, like, to give a really small example, the most recent development for me methodologically has been applying the history and culture of the ancient Near East as methodology within the Hebrew Bible studies. And that's been the last few years for me. And now I'm spoiled because I have Dr. Nathan French's phone number, and you guys don't.
Who taught you to do this? Yes.
But it could be as simple as, when I'm reading a text, I send a text to Nathan and be like, hey, any resources you recommend for fill in the blank, whatever, or hey, what do you think about this? Even if you don't have someone's contact information, you can at least just figure out what's a good book. Find something that someone like Nathan recommends about ancient Near East history, and just add it to your library. And so I have a commentary series he recommended. So now when I'm studying a text, I have one other commentary that I'll look at. And it's such small, simple steps we can take to chip away at the sculpture we're trying to create of good, beautiful, holistic, and moving exegesis for the people in our lives and for our own enjoyment.
Absolutely. So well said. And I think Professor Richelle's done a great job here of saying, and that's with the bibliography, especially throughout each of the different methodologies. His bibliography shows, look, you may be specialized, but hey, students, you need to be aware of all of these various scholars and what they're doing. And here is the literature that you need to go to it. I want to make one comment, though, before we move on the with regard to biblical with regard to exegesis and pastors. Didn't he mention that here? Was that in the previous?
He did.
No, exegesis
Yeah.
and preaching. Here we are. Exegesis and preaching are often kept apart in their minds, whereas I think there should be a continuum, talking about preachers with regard to giving of sermons. And this is I can't stress this enough, and I stress it with my students who are wanting to go into ministry, most of them. And of course, I can tell you from practice. Now, I when I got into this, I wanted to be a preacher. I mean, I felt like I was called to ministry, and ended up going the professor route because teaching was such an emphasis within my gifting areas within the church. I would always want to teach more than preach, but I have noticed even in certain contexts where I've done preaching, even of recent date, the exegesis is just there because that's what I do for a living. And I think we need more of this within much of the church again. I mean, there are church traditions that really stress this, but allowing the exegesis to be very much, as he puts, a continuum with regard to the sermon, that the hard exegetical work is actually coming out, because what you need to be giving to the sheep is real food of the text, right? It's the text that needs to be feeding the sheep, and it is good exegetical work that gets you there. And just know the sheep want it. They will sit and they will listen, and they will try to understand that exegesis come forward, and the Holy Spirit will really bless it as well. So we can't emphasize that continuum needs to be there, as he stresses for preachers when it comes to exegesis. So
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, look, if we respect Scripture, we need to approach Scripture on its own terms.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that
good.
involves doing a thorough exegesis, because we have a responsibility as communicators of Scripture to, for example, speaking about preachers again and people who are pastors. Yeah, there's a responsibility to give them I like the food analogy you use, right? To give the good food to people. And so, I think no matter what you're preparing for, that exegesis, at the very least, it is the foundation of the building which you are building for that sermon.
That's right.
And you do not want a faulty foundation.
No.
It doesn't mean that every single thing you study during the week will make its way into the communication, but at the very least, it is the foundation that will ensure that what you are giving them and what they're going to stand on is firm and strong. It doesn't collapse on itself in their lives when they take people who are doing this whole eisegesis thing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I agree.
That's so good. Yep.
So we'll never be perfect, we're going to fall short in different ways, but let's attempt the correct thing, if that makes sense. At least attempt to make sure we're doing holistic exegesis and not just riffing whatever we want.
And for those because look, when you know this, Matthieu, you've been in ministry, I've been in ministry. Like you have 7 days, you preach on one of those days, and you get a little bit of a rest, and you got to start the preparation all over again, right? So exegetical work, it can be difficult for ministers and for those who are in the preaching ministry. Get his book. This helps. See, these methodologies that we give students, the abilities to actually exegete the text, it's a time saver, because now all of a sudden you have the tools that you need to quickly move through the text and to get the meat that you need to get in order to give to your followers. So
one piece of advice I would give on this note, because again, especially for pastors, but anybody else, you're busy, right? You're not just preparing a message. You're having to lead an organization and everything that comes with that. One advice I might give people is, once you sift through a book, like, for example, Matthieu Richelle's book, you sift through it enough, I think it might be wise to just choose one method you want to start applying a little bit more.
That's good.
As opposed to trying to add all 10, for example. There are more than 10, but just if you're trying to apply 10 things at one time, it's hard to apply any of them with any efficacy. Whereas if you start applying one, focusing on that, not neglecting others intentionally if it comes up, but really focusing on the one method and just start adding it. And once you do that enough, it'll feel really solid. It's similar to, I'll use another sports analogy. If someone who has the ball and you're trying to score, there are a lot of different moves you could practice to get past your opponent to try to score. But if you try 15 different moves sporadically, you never master any of them. But once you master one move, then they have to try to stop that move. Once they do that, you practice a move that works off of that move. And that's how you can build out to become a really dynamic offensive athlete. And I think as a pastor, just my recommendation, I'm not saying that's the only way to look at it, but I think if you, not like you have to spend years on one method, but if you just spend even like a month, right? This month, I really want to sharpen a little bit of my fill in the blank methodology.
Yeah.
You might make some more progress.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. So,
okay, the next question is this: navigating the conversation of biblical sources can be difficult for people of faith. What was helpful for you finding clarity on the compositional history while maintaining your faith? He says this: I know this struggle by experience. What I found helpful is the fact that it is the Bible itself that forces us to admit a compositional history.
it's good.
Many complexities in the text require us to admit that the text underwent several stages of redaction. Therefore, admitting this is honoring the Bible. It also means that the Bible is more sophisticated than we often intuitively think. In this regard, I admire the work of www.thetorah.com, where, among other things, Jewish scholars talk about the confrontation between their faith and the scholarly study of the Hebrew Bible.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent.
That's the shortest way to put it, right? If we want to respect Scripture, what does Scripture say about itself?
Yeah, exactly.
And, we can disagree on our theories of exactly what compositional stuff looks like, but at the end of the day, we're reading the text, and what does the text say about itself? And I understand, depending on what our background is, this may or may not be difficult to deal with. But I think that's a great response from him.
It really is. Yeah, no, it really is. And there's nothing better to do than to put it back on the text. Like, the reason why we have these compositional theories is because the text requires us to have that when you dive deeply into it. I mean, even if we were to talk about, for example, source criticism, which always receives sort of a bad reputation of late, and you get into sort of Valhausian theory, and you get into source, the JEPD source, and all the other redactions that they would add to it, and you find that there seems to be a sense in which some of the Jewish exegetes were even stumbling upon this themselves. Right? It's just a deep reading of the text. The medieval Jewish exegetes, a deep reading of the text, begins to show that there is compositional history, and the truth is, it outright states it. I mean, it states it in various levels. We have, if you want to know more about such and such a history, you can go read this particular source, right? That we see in Kings and other places. So,
yeah, really good, really good.
Yeah.
Let's go to our next question.
Okay, number 8. Can you expound on the tension? Number 8. Can you expound upon the tension between history and a text received at a later date, and how this impacts the exegetical process? So a related follow-up question is, how should exegetes go about comparing a later text with much earlier textual data from the broader Near East and West Semitic world that is comparable in dating to the purported time of the story present in a later text? So his response was this. It was a great response. So what underlies these questions is the fact that a story may have been written much later than the time of the events it narrates. Hence the distinction between the time of redaction, or times of redactions, and the time of reference, i.e., when the events are supposed to take place. Why is that important? Because it creates the possibility for various situations. A text can be late, but based on an old source and reflect at least a kernel of actual events. A text can be late and be the product of a series of redactions staggered over centuries. A text can talk about a distant past, but actually be largely influenced by the time of the writer. In such a case, the text yields important historical information on the latter time, be it only about ideas and conceptions current at that time. In short, This potential distance between the time of redaction and the time of reference makes the life of exegetes interested in history a bit spicier.
Those
To
are his
answer,
actual words, a bit
those are his
spicier.
actual
I
words.
love
Yep,
that.
that's great. To answer, get some French cuisine in there or something. Yeah. So, anyways, to answer your second question, obviously, if a text purports to speak of an early time but is actually inspired by events and practices of a later time, exegetes may have the wrong target if they look for extra biblical sources concerning the time of reference. At the same time, the issue of chronological distance should be put into perspective because practices, beliefs, and traditions may last over centuries. As a result, you sometimes find data in old texts that can shed light in late texts. In sum, exegetes should keep an open mind.
What a thorough,
Well,
thorough
yeah,
response to our question.
that really was.
Really well
Very
worded.
good. Very good.
I mean, he handled all the different angles about how we approach this in about as concise a way as you can in
No,
a
he
couple
can.
paragraph
Yeah,
response.
that was excellent. Yeah, very good.
Those interested in more, he goes through the whole history section in his book,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see how he approaches this. So again, like many of the areas within the methodology, there are certain aspects that people may or may not agree with or land on the exact same page. There's certain elements of this, like one common example is prophecy. For some people, the way they approach the historical side of this comes from an idea that, would someone speak about events that seem to be in the future? Could they do that? How would they have the ability to do that? Would God empower them to do that? Would he not? Would they do that? And then it brings up a whole discussion about how do we date certain prophetic texts.
Yeah.
But you're not going to find total agreement on that. So it's a conversation to engage.
Yep. Very good.
Question 9. Does your expertise in inscriptions and archaeology play a role in this book? If so, in what way? He responds with, yes, my interest in these aspects helped me when writing several chapters. In the chapter on literary genre, I try to help the reader find writings from the ancient Near East that can be compared to texts in the Hebrew Bible. In the chapter on history, I talk about the comparison between biblical passages and epigraphical texts or archaeological findings. It did not hurt to have written a book on the subject, the Bible and archaeology, ! Shameless plug for another book that he has written.
Exactly.
It's fun seeing how our expertises come to play and impact the things that we do.
And honestly, it was really nice in this book to see that he had this particular interest, and it showed very well in the methodology how you should use some of this methodology. So, I'm thinking, for example, the iconographic text of the ancient Near East and how important that is for understanding and interpreting certain passages within the text itself. So it's great. Okay, number 10. Is there anything you would like to say about your book or any words of wisdom or encouragement for exegetes of the Hebrew Bible? I'd like to encourage those who are still in the early stages of studying the exegesis of the Hebrew Bible. This field is much more varied than you may believe. There is an amazing variety of texts to study and plenty of approaches and methods to do that. I found fascinating insights in all the methods I present in the book, even in those I was less familiar with. I encourage you to try at least to learn a bit of each, even if you will later specialize in one or a few.
Some great advice, and I can't emphasize enough to not be overwhelmed by all the methods. I think it's great to be at very least exposed to all of them. But ultimately, we're probably going to specialize in one or a few. We will utilize some others to be holistic.
Yeah.
And that's just realistically how things go for people.
Yeah, and I think by reading this book, what happens is you're introduced to the different methodologies of interpretation. Ergo, when you are reading various interpretations of a text, the bare minimum, you can at least understand what the methodology is that's being used, so that you can have a discussion. There's nothing worse than argumentation and debate when two methodologies are clashing, and that really is the issue. Like, if we could just look at it from the perspectives of the methodologies, then we'd be good to go, you know? So, anyways, it's a good idea to have a wide understanding of the methodologies, and this book does a fantastic job of introducing you to each of them while giving you all of the bibliography that you need to specialize in each.
Yes.
Or to begin that specialization.
Yeah, the bibliographies of every chapter are great, because it's not just, here are the sources I used to write this chapter. He makes a unique bibliography that is, here's what I recommend if you want to get better at blank. And it's not just a generic, okay, end of the chapter,
right,
all the different things I mentioned, one of these covers it. He actually lists out, if you're wanting to know more about the Phoenicians, here is a recommended source. If you want to know more about this aspect of textual criticism, here is the source. Like, it's very precise. So I find that really helpful.
That's great.
So this has been a different kind of quote interview than normal, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this. As you can tell, we really like this book. I think it's a great resource to engage with. And we have links to this book in the show notes below. And we thank all of you for joining us on Hebrew Bible Insights. If you find value in this, share this with your friends, and know that every month we get together with some of our patrons on Patreon to do a Bible study. And if that's something you guys are interested in, you can also see the link to that below and become a part of our Hebrew Bible Insights book club and have a great time reading some of these texts. So that's all for today, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.